All right, who's ready to do some shooting? I am. I'm having a lot of fun. I hope you are too. Today we're going to take everything that we've talked about so far, pull it together, and talk about the actual photo shoot or the video shoot, right? So when we're actually going to sit down and create some footage. The first thing we're going to consider here is that we've got our tripod set up. We've got the right camera in place on that tripod. We've got an external microphone so that we know we're going to have some good audio that goes along with it. And we've considered our lighting. Maybe that means an external light, or maybe your studio setup is such that you've already got enough natural light that you're good to go. Great, things are in place now. So let's talk about my process for keeping things simple and getting some great footage. First of all, go ahead and find that place where you're actually going to do your shooting. Now, as you've seen, the past few episodes here related to this vlogging series that I'm doing, I've been sitting at my dining room table at our house here in California, and it works pretty well. I mean, is it the greatest backdrop? No, but kind of gets the job done. Tile here's got a little bit of style to it. We've got the geometric pattern behind me, so it's just enough to keep things sort of interesting. Try to stay away from doing something as basic as sitting right in front of a beige wall at the office. Give people something to look at, but remember what we were talking about when it comes to lighting. So you might say, look, I have a great corner office here and it's overlooking the downtown skyline or the ocean or whatever it is. And that's fantastic, except that you know sitting in front of that window is going to create some pretty big lighting challenges. And it's not that those can't be overcome, but it's going to add some complexity to your shooting. So if you're going to be indoors, find some place that's kind of interesting. And this could be in a lobby, or it could be in a manufacturing plant, just anything outside of maybe a cubicle or a very basic office setup where there's nothing behind you to add any kind of visual interest. One thing you see a lot of YouTubers, professional YouTubers doing is taking kind of cool lights and having those in the background behind them. And you can get LED strips from anywhere. I mean, you can go to Target and get those. You can order them on Amazon. And these are things where you can like change the colors. You can even have it go rainbow. I've done some of these in my videos before, and I think it adds a pretty cool level of interest behind you. So you could actually have the lighting behind you be pretty dim as long as you've got lighting like this pointing right at you. It'll actually help you really separate you as the subject of the video from the background. So if it's a little bit darker back there, maybe you have a couple of mood lights, whether it's those LED strips or a cool lamp that just provides some glows in the background, that can be super cool. And remember, if you're going to be outdoors, we want to try to make it be on either an overcast day, or you're going to have to beef up your equipment and your technique a bit to overcome any of that direct sun. I'd actually be out on the beach today if it weren't for the fact that, number one, it's really sunny, but number two, I want to show you guys some hardware and I don't want to carry all that stuff down to the sand. All right, so let's dive in. Now I set up a little demo here, and I actually did this with an iPod mini, okay? Little special mount here on my mini tripod. And I just want to do that so that you can actually see the screen more easily here. And of course I'm using a mini tripod just because I don't want to be lugging this big full-size tripod around in front of me. So let's come up with a fake scenario. Let's say I'm going to be you and I'm creating a video today that I'm going to show to prospects I'm reaching out to on LinkedIn. And maybe it's going to be a tip. I'm in legal, so I'm actually going to give them a tip related to PPP loans right now. So I decide that I'm going to do this at my desk because I've got all these great bookshelves behind me with all the legal books I picked up from law school. So it's a very professional and impressive looking backdrop. So I've decided that I'm going to set my tripod up on my desk. I'm going to do it at a bit of an angle just so I don't have a straight on shot. Again, a little bit more visual interest. It also happens to be pointed a bit toward that window in my office right ahead so I get some of that natural light. That said, I'm going to have one of these softbox lights that we talked about in the last episode, and I'm going to set that up here just so that I can get some nice angled light. We call it a key light, by the way, at a slight angle to my face and making sure that it doesn't really lighten up anything behind me any more than necessary. So again, it's going to make me glow a bit, and it's going to leave my background alone, so I'll get that visual separation just because of that piece. Also, of course, we've got the all-important microphone set up right here, and this one's not my favorite. I really like that wireless Go, but I'm using that one right now, so I'm not going to stick it on my demo unit. All right, so we're going with just this little video mic hooked up here, and you can see that I've got it plugged in to the lightning port on the iPad. Now, couple of caveats. Number one, always test. I can tell you firsthand experience, it really sucks when you do 15 to 20 minutes of video, especially when you think it's great footage, and then find out that your sound wasn't working. And that can happen for any number of reasons, and I've had it happen across every device, even fancy DSLR cameras. Sometimes you forget to turn the things on, and that's especially true with some of these shotgun mics. They literally have a power button on the back. I can't tell you how many times I've forgotten to turn that on. Another problem that I sometimes run into, like in the smartphone option, is that this, for whatever reason, maybe just hasn't been plugged in at the right time, so it doesn't trigger it as a new change in audio source for whatever recording app I'm using. So we just want to make sure that piece is working. And then when it comes to my favorite microphone, that Rode Video Mic Go that we talked about, wireless Go, that one's particularly important because you've got the two little pieces that both need to be turned on, and that allows them to pair. But once you have them paired, you still need to make sure that it's going to work correctly. So I always shoot a real short video, and it could be 2 seconds, anything where you talk. And I like to do it where I'm talking away from the phone. That way, when I hear the audio playing that video back, I can tell for sure that it's using the microphone that is intended versus recording with the built-in microphone, and I just couldn't tell. So sometimes with the wireless unit, I'll even walk 10 feet away, do a little sound test, so that when I come back and listen to it, I can tell, well, it's loud enough. If it picked it up from 10 feet away, that's pretty amazing. Now, here's the other thing. When you play it back, note that as a general rule, at least on Apple devices, you're not going to be able to hear the sound in here while you still have a sound device plugged in. So I record my test real quick, then I come back, pop this out, play that video back for myself, and make sure that the audio is where I want it. If it is, I'm confident enough that I just plug this bad boy right back in. Got to make sure you do that. And then we're kind of ready to shoot. Now, obviously, if we've gotten to this point, we should have a pretty good idea of what we're going to talk about. But that brings up an interesting question, and one that I had to answer myself last year, which is, should I be using a teleprompter for this? The answer to that question can sometimes be yes, and I think probably more than anything, it's a matter of personal preference. But let me tell you my thought process and how I ended up kind of going back and forth. Number one, I didn't start off with a teleprompter. I actually decided to give it a try once I was creating my online course. So it was a much more substantial video program than just kind of sitting down and vlogging. I actually created all the scripts for the entire program ahead of time, every last detail, wordsmith the crap out of it. So it was fantastic, and I wanted to make sure that I could actually stick to that script without memorizing it. And since we were talking about 24 video episodes as part of that online course, memorizing it simply was not reasonable. So I decided to give a teleprompter a try, and I went through a few different types. The first one was a software teleprompter. So that's something that could be built into an iPad, for example, and I'll show you that one shortly. What I ended up doing, because I was shooting that program with my DSLR camera, was getting a real professional teleprompter, which allows me to have this box that the DSLR camera goes into, locks out all the light, creates a mirrored front that then becomes the panel that you're going to read off of. And I used this iPad mini in there to teleprompt all of the text for me. Now that teleprompter device, which I can't show you right now because it's at our place in Denver, is not only a little bit more expensive. I want to say that thing probably ran $150 to $200, but it really is geared for the DSLR cameras so that you can put that device in there. You don't really need a DSLR camera to vlog, so I wouldn't recommend that device anyway. Now I'll tell you that as I used that teleprompter, even to create the online course, it wasn't a great experience. Sometimes you want to ad lib, you certainly always want to sound natural, and I think both those things become very difficult when you have a teleprompter. They're great if you have to do actual scripts for, say, a commercial or I'm sure a film or a television show, but when you want to really connect with an audience, it makes it really difficult because you're concentrating so hard on maintaining pace, and unless you've really got that material down, it's difficult to throw a whole lot of emotion into it. And that's why you end up almost always, I think, kind of sounding like a newscaster, which makes sense because that's exactly what they're using to read their lines. Now, let's say that you just decide you do want to use a teleprompter for one reason or another, and that's cool. There's certainly some formats of video where I think there's a lot of justification for doing that. I want to show you something that I think makes a whole lot of sense. Now, if you remember, back to our camera episode, one of the options that I recommended was using an iPad. And take into consideration, when I say iPad, I really mean tablet. Obviously, my experience is with the Apple devices, but I'm sure you can do this with Android devices as well. One of the really cool apps that I like using here is called Prompt Smart Pro, and I'll put a link to this app in the description. But what I love about it, you can create all of your own documents, so you put those in there, and you can't read a damn thing on there right now because it's so small. But once you go into teleprompter mode, it's going to bring it up on the screen. Why is this cool? Well, number one, consider the fact that it's nice and big on a very big screen. So it eliminates the need for one of those big teleprompters that I was talking about completely. Number two, you're actually looking at the screen that's recording you anyway. So I've got my camera right up here, and then I've got all of my text down below. That can actually create one challenge, but they've done a pretty good job of addressing it. The challenge is what we talked about before, where anytime you have the screen in front of you when you're recording, it's very tempting to look at yourself. And when you do that, you end up looking off screen just slightly, so like this. And then everybody who's watching that video is like, wait a minute, this looks kind of weird. It looks like they're looking at themselves. This does a really good job of knowing exactly where the camera is on the screen, so you can set it to just stick the text close to the camera. So it really minimizes that component. However, they went ahead and put the preview of the video over here on the other side, which makes it that much more tempting to look at yourself. And that's the farthest part away from the camera. So it kind of exacerbates. I'd almost say maybe put a piece of paper over there so you can't even see that. There may even be a setting in here that eliminates that. But a lot of really cool features in here. And in fact, one of my favorites is the voice recognition. So basically what happens is when we start it, it's going to show me the text. And as I read it, it's listening to my voice and it's going to scroll automatically. That's key. Because what I ran into with my other teleprompter is that you've got to get that speed that you set it to scroll just right, or you end up having to race to catch back up with the script, or you find yourself in a situation where you're reading too fast and now you've got to stop and wait for a minute. That's something you either have to edit out later, or it's something that just looks weird in the video. So it's very difficult to get that pinpointed, especially if your script is going to be 10 minutes, 15 minutes long. So I recommend something like this where it actually listens to you and it only scrolls as it hears you reading those words, and it can slow down and speed up on its own. A lot of other really cool features in this particular app, and granted it cost a few bucks, but come on, it's still a mobile app, so a drop in the bucket compared to pretty much all of the equipment that we've talked about so far. All right, so back to framing, taking our actual shot. One big thing that I see a lot, surprisingly, even on a professional level, is people doing a poor job of framing a shot. Sometimes that could mean a very low angle because the tripod's too low, or of course, whenever we're just trying to hold a phone down low and we're looking up into people's nostrils, and this is just no good. So we want to stay away from that. We want to make sure that as a general rule, we're always straight on, sometimes even slightly high with the camera, looking slightly down. Key there is the word slightly, not too much. And once we have that piece set up, understanding that we don't want to focus too close or too far, and we don't necessarily want to be right in on someone's face as the center point. I've been watching Stephen Colbert's A Late Show on YouTube lately, and this is him filming from home because of the lockdown. And I'm surprised that even with the budgets they have to do the show, nobody has told him he needs to lower that camera down a bit or raise his chair up a bit. But his face is right in the middle of the shot, about 5 or 6 feet from the camera, so it just looks very strange. What you want to do is kind of picture the screen being divided into thirds in both directions. And then I think getting the eyeballs and that top 1/3 line is going to be ideal. So really, the person's face should be above center, 2/3 of the way up the screen. And even though a centered on shot horizontally looks really good, you don't have to do that. Especially if you have an interesting background, you can experiment with putting the subject on the left 1/3 or the right 1/3 of the shot, maybe even a bit of an angle so that you can get something a little more creative. So what happens next is going to depend a little bit on what kind of help you have when doing your shooting. If you're the only one there, you're going to have to start and stop the camera on your own, and that's not a problem. Even if you're having to get up to walk around, start the camera, come back and sit down, that's fine because you can easily edit that out later. Now, as I mentioned, because I shoot on an iPhone sometimes, I have the ability to not only preview my shot and frame everything up looking at my Apple Watch as a viewfinder, but I can start and stop the video there. That's really handy. I can't do that with the iPad, by the way. I'm not sure why that part's not supported. Now, if you have a helper, all of this is going to be a whole lot easier. You've got somebody who can stand behind the camera, test the sound, make sure everything's framed up properly and stays framed up properly, and make sure that it doesn't run into any problems during filming that you may not know about because you can't see the screen. That's happened to me a lot of times too. Now, one of the last things I like to do is go through a checklist. And this can vary. It's going to depend on your studio setup. It's going to depend on your equipment, which camera you're using, how many people you have helping you. But I've always created a different checklist that I go through for each setup I have. And it could be everything from maybe putting on a little anti-shine powder to putting my phone into do not disturb mode, to turning off the furnace if I was filming in my basement studio, testing sound, any of these things. And by the way, you're probably going to run into your own issues as soon as you start filming, things where you're like, oh, I forgot that, or oh, this didn't work quite right last time. That's what becomes your list. So I put these things on a list, I print it out, sometimes I actually tape it up like under the camera, someplace where I'm going to see it every time, right as I'm getting ready to push that record button so that I can go through and make sure everything has been done properly. If you do happen to be filming with a smartphone, remember that do not disturb component. You don't want to get any telephone calls in the middle of your recording, or this is going to take a whole lot more time than I say it is. So you record your footage, and once it's done, you're going to stop the recording. From there, I usually recommend doing something as quickly as possible to get some redundancy on that file. Now, if you spent 4 minutes recording a little vlog, not a big deal. If you lose it, you can easily re-record it. But sometimes you spend a lot more effort than that. Maybe some things just really went right. Maybe you feel like you performed really well on camera that time and you're very happy with the footage. And then you find out that, I don't know, you break your SD card or you accidentally delete the wrong file. By the way, I've done all of these things. Now, anytime you're going to be filming on an iPad or on a smartphone, sometimes there can be built-in redundancies where like your photos are automatically backed up, like Google Photos does or the Apple Photos does. But I like to transfer or AirDrop whenever I'm on an iOS device, maybe to Erin because she's going to be doing the editing anyway, and then I have that redundancy built in. I also happen to have automatic backups on every device so that no matter what is on there, it's going to get backed up. But sometimes you can still run into problems with those because it can take a really long time to upload or back up a large video file. So keep that in mind. Try to get a backup as quickly as you can so that you don't lose that footage. Okay, so now we've got our footage. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to get into the next episode where we talk about how to edit that footage, and then our final episode where we talk about what we're going to do with our final edited footage. How are we going to upload it? Where are we going to upload it? And how are we going to optimize so that we actually bring viewers in? So stick with me, subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next lesson.